Everyone brace yourselves, because what's coming next isn't tabloid chatter. It's the kind of story the industry prays never sees daylight. Beyond the velvet ropes, the flashing cameras, and those perfectly curated social feeds, there may be a truth so explosive it could fracture reputations, derail careers, and send shockwaves through Hollywood's most guarded circles. Tonight, one name is echoing through the halls of power. Teyana Taylor. And the silence surrounding her was just shattered by a voice that's never been afraid of backlash. Tasha K. According to claims made on her podcast, this isn't about petty drama or celebrity shade. This is about secrets, betrayal, and a private situation insiders allegedly tried to keep buried. Whispers of confidential information, hushed conversations, and documents never meant for public eyes are now swirling at the center of a controversy so unsettling that some behind the scenes are calling it an industry emergency. Rumors of a concealed issue, questions about who knew what, and speculation that certain high-profile figures may have been pulled into something they didn't fully understand. Fans are stunned. Insiders are on edge. And behind closed doors, phones are lighting up, legal teams are mobilizing, and quiet strategies are already unfolding. Because if even part of these allegations holds weight, this stops being celebrity gossip. It becomes a crisis with consequences, a revelation that could permanently alter how one of entertainment's most protected figures is seen. So before we go further, ask yourself this. What if the star you trusted most was guarding a truth no one was meant to uncover? Because once you hear what Tasha K claims to know, there may be no easy way to look away. What Tasha K revealed next was the kind of truth Hollywood prays never leaves the shadows. She painted a picture far removed from the flawless skin, the glitzy red carpets, and the meticulously curated social media persona. According to her, lurking beneath it all was a secret that had been locked away for years. Not idle rumors, not casual whispers, but confidential records, hidden documents, and warnings that were never meant to reach the public ear. From the very first second of her podcast, her voice carried a weight, deliberate and controlled. No joking, no playful tone, just a sharp, measured caution that immediately sent chills through her listeners. Because when Tasha K speaks like that, it usually means she's about to drop something heavy. She warned that Hollywood isn't just built on talent or fame. It's built on silence, hush agreements, cover-ups, and secrets potent enough to crumble careers. And then she dropped the name that froze the room, Teyana Taylor. According to Tasha, this story wasn't breaking news behind the scenes. It had been quietly circulating for years, whispered in closed rooms, hinted at in elite circles, and deliberately kept from the public eye. But she claimed that era of silence was over. Her allegation: Teyana had been concealing a serious condition for an extended period. Not minor, not temporary. Something that, if true, could have impacted personal relationships, professional ties, and anyone unlucky enough to be caught in its path. Tasha insisted this was not speculation. She said she had examined private documents, confidential leaks, and intimate conversations. And what those files suggested, she claimed, was not just shocking, it was terrifying. Several people who should have been informed, she alleged, were left in the dark. The fallout, she warned, may already have quietly touched lives in ways the public would never suspect. Every word was carefully measured, allegedly rooted in verified sources and documents. Yet the implication was clear. This wasn't just a personal story. It was a narrative about risk, exposure, and a domino effect quietly sweeping through Hollywood's elite. Then she shifted focus to relationships. Tasha claimed that in Teyana's most fragile moment, immediately following her divorce, choices were made that would later raise alarming questions. She described Teyana as emotionally unstable, still raw from a painful public breakup, attempting to move forward too quickly, and perhaps hiding a truth no one around her could have imagined. And then Tasha turned her lens on one figure in particular, Aaron Pierre. What she revealed next sent the entire story careening in a direction no one saw coming. The moment those words hit the air, the room seemed to freeze. Suddenly, this was no longer just a story about hidden health struggles. It had morphed into chaos, scandal, and a web of choices spinning wildly out of control. Tasha painted a portrait of a woman unraveling before the world's eyes, making impulsive, dangerous decisions, and pulling others into storms they never signed up for. Boundaries vanished, lines were crossed, and entire environments were allegedly crafted that exposed people to far more than they could have imagined. Then came the revelation that left listeners stunned into silence. Tasha claimed that Teyana's ex-husband Amon Shumpert might have been among the first impacted, not emotionally but physically. She never said it outright, but the deliberate pauses, the emphasis, the repeated allegedly, all painted a chilling picture. She suggested the divorce might not have been fueled by betrayal alone, but by fear of what had already occurred and fear of what might still come to light. According to her, the pattern didn't end there. Allegedly, other high-profile figures became entangled. Names Hollywood guards jealously, names like Kanye West and yes, once again Aaron Pierre. These weren't fleeting encounters or casual meetings. According to Tasha, they were relationships forged during a period when a serious risk may have already been present. That, she warned, is when the story crossed into dangerous territory. Because this wasn't just about private betrayal anymore. It had escalated into a potential public hazard. Tasha explained that in the shadowed corners of Hollywood, entire systems exist to contain these situations. NDAs, hush settlements, medical confidentiality agreements, reputation management teams, all designed to shield the truth. She hinted that these mechanisms had already been set in motion. Phones buzzing late into the night, lawyers mobilizing, agents scrambling. Once a secret like this emerges, she warned, there's no predicting where the fallout lands. But she said the most alarming part wasn't the condition itself. It was the silence. The people who should have known, allegedly, were never informed. Trust may have been broken in ways that cannot be undone. And then Tasha returned to Aaron Pierre, describing him as young, inexperienced, newly immersed in Hollywood's ruthless power circles, and likely unaware of what he had stepped into. His subsequent behavior, neediness, emotional dependence, confusion, suggested someone grappling with a storm far beyond what he anticipated. And just when listeners thought they'd absorbed it all, Tasha dropped another devastating assessment. One that made it impossible to ignore the gravity of everything she had just revealed. Those words hit like a punch to the chest because in that instant, the story stopped sounding like romance and started sounding like refuge. What looked like passion now felt like panic. What seemed like chemistry began to resemble crisis management. Tasha suggested this connection was never rooted in something solid. It wasn't built on truth. It wasn't built on balance. It was built on escape. Escape from a crumbling marriage, from mounting whispers, from pressure closing in, and possibly from a reality that was becoming impossible to outrun. She told her audience that what unsettled her wasn't surface-level gossip. It was the pattern, the timing, the secrecy, the emotional instability, and the number of people who may have stepped into a situation without ever realizing the weight of what surrounded it. By the end of that segment, one thing was undeniable. This had outgrown the label of celebrity relationship drama. It was starting to feel like the opening chapter of something much darker. Because if even part of what she implied was true, the next phase wouldn't revolve around heartbreak. It would revolve around fallout, the kind that leaves permanent marks Hollywood can't simply edit away. And when Tasha paused, the silence said everything. Listeners could feel it in their gut. The worst part of the story was still waiting in the shadows. What she described next was the turning point where the narrative quietly shifted from scandal to something far more unsettling. According to her, the real danger wasn't emotional at all. It was systemic. She leaned closer to the mic, voice low and deliberate, and made it clear this wasn't just about messy breakups. It was about risk, about consequences, and about a hidden chain of events that may have stretched further than anyone realized. She framed it not as random drama, but as a pattern of silence. A culture where difficult truths are contained instead of confronted. According to Tasha, in elite entertainment circles, sensitive personal matters aren't handled the way everyday people expect. They're managed, controlled, redirected, lawyers step in, narratives shift. Reputations become the priority. In that environment, she implied, transparency can become optional. She told listeners the most troubling element wasn't just the alleged issue itself. It was the timeline. The suggestion that certain truths may have existed long before key relationships ever began. And if that were the case, she hinted, it would raise painful questions about who knew, who didn't, and who was left to piece things together on their own. Behind the scenes, she claimed, there were quiet conversations, subtle distancing, private concerns, but nothing that ever reached the public eye. Then she turned to the emotional impact because pressure like that doesn't just strain relationships. It fractures them. She described insiders allegedly noticing shifts in behavior. Withdrawal, mood swings, sudden breakups, plans collapsing overnight. Almost as if people weren't walking away because they wanted to, but because staying felt too heavy, too complicated, too uncertain. But because staying felt like stepping into a trap. Tasha suggested that at least one partner began asking the questions nobody wanted answered. Sharp, probing medical questions, questions with implications too heavy to ignore. And when those questions surfaced, everything unraveled overnight. No press statements, no public reasoning, just a sudden eerie silence. Then she circled back to Aaron Pierre, not as a rebound figure, but as the potential tipping point. Tasha claimed this was the relationship where the secret, allegedly, could no longer be contained. Aaron, she said, reacted differently, more attached, more vulnerable, more invested than anyone who had come before. He entered expecting stability, but instead was plunged into confusion, secrecy, and emotional turbulence.
Medicine for Melancholy,
Followed, according to Tasha,
directed by Barry
a portrait
Jenkins.
of distress few could have anticipated. After
American
the relationship
Gangster.
ended, those around him reportedly
I love
noticed
that.
anxiety, withdrawal, and behaviors that hinted at someone grappling with forces beyond comprehension. Then came one of Tasha's most chilling observations. She claimed this was the exact moment the situation quietly morphed into an industry-wide warning. Not announced, not documented, but whispered between managers, passed from agent to agent and carefully flagged to select doctors. She alleged that discreet instructions were given. Subtle tests, quiet precautions, with no alerts, no headlines, just silent measures behind closed doors. And then she posed the question that changed the entire tone of the podcast. What if this didn't stop with one relationship? What if it didn't stop with two? What if it had never been contained at all? According to what she claimed to have seen, the network extended far beyond anyone's imagination. Partners, collaborators, producers, actors, people who shared private spaces during tours, shoots, and exclusive gatherings. And then she dropped the name that sent the chat into a frenzy. Leonardo DiCaprio. She didn't accuse, didn't confirm. But she left the audience with the unsettling possibility. If this pattern continued unchecked, even Hollywood's highest echelons could have been touched. A silence fell as listeners realized the stakes. This wasn't gossip anymore. This was a potential public health scenario. Tasha explained that in circumstances like these, silence becomes the deadliest weapon. The longer people remain unaware, the wider the damage spreads. And she returned to behavior, noting one of the most revealing signs. Emotional imbalance, dependency, constant need for reassurance, seeking comfort not just from heartbreak but from a deeper fear. And in that lens, she revealed how the very dynamics of these relationships exposed cracks that had been carefully hidden from view. Those words flipped the story yet again. What once sounded like danger now looked like evasion. What felt like exposure started to resemble distraction. Tasha suggested this connection was never about romance in the first place. It was about survival. Staying in motion. Filling every second. Avoiding silence at all costs. Because silence leaves room for questions and questions can unravel everything. She claimed Teyana's calendar suddenly became relentless. Back-to-back projects, constant travel, non-stop appearances. As if momentum itself was a shield, a way to outrun consequences waiting in the dark. Insiders, she said, described her as emotionally distant during that period. Guarded. Closed off. Almost fearful of letting anyone get too close. And when someone did break through, they were pushed back out just as quickly. According to Tasha, heartbreak wasn't what ended those relationships. It was discovery. Suspicion. Information that landed too heavy to ignore. That, she alleged, is why the breakups felt so abrupt. No drawn-out endings. No public explanations. Just sudden silence, like doors slamming shut in the dark. Then she introduced what she called the containment phase. The moment Hollywood allegedly realized this situation had the potential to explode. Reputation managers stepped in, she claimed. Storylines were rerouted. Public narratives were softened, blurred, and reshaped. Instead of difficult questions, audiences were fed rumors of cheating, clashing personalities, creative differences, anything that would keep attention away from the real issue. And it worked. For years, fans argued about drama, loyalty, and egos, never realizing they might be watching a carefully managed diversion. No one, she said, asked the most dangerous question of all. Was someone being shielded? She told listeners the emotional toll behind the scenes was devastating. Sleepless nights. Anxiety spirals. Isolation. People quietly pulling away from friends and partners, living under the weight of uncertainty. She described one individual in particular who allegedly spiraled, months of denial before finally seeking private answers. Not public statements, not media leaks, but deeply personal clarity that never reached headlines. And when those answers came, careers shifted direction, contracts were reworked, and certain relationships simply disappeared. From that point forward, she said, the story stopped being about one person. It became about containment. Because if even a portion of these claims ever broke into mainstream coverage, the fallout could ripple across labels, studios, sponsorships, entire business structures at risk. That, she argued, is why the response behind closed doors was immediate. Emergency meetings, crisis calls, quiet directives to stay silent. And that silence, she claimed, is what kept this story buried for so long. By the end of that segment, the mood had completely shifted. What started as shocking celebrity gossip now felt darker, more systemic, like a machine working overtime to keep something from surfacing. And as Tasha paused to take a breath, one reality settled in. If this chapter held any truth, the next phase wouldn't be about relationships at all. It would be about panic, reputation freefall, and an industry scrambling to contain a narrative it could no longer fully control. By the time Tasha K reached this point in her podcast, the damage, she implied, had already begun, just not in public view. Not splashed across headlines, but unfolding quietly behind closed doors in Hollywood's most powerful circles. According to her, the moment these whispers began moving through the industry, the reaction wasn't denial, it was fear. Phones reportedly rang deep into the night. Off-the-record meetings were set. Legal teams, she claimed, were placed on alert before a single reporter had even caught wind of the story. Insiders allegedly described the mood as control on the surface, panic underneath. Not because the narrative was harmless, but because it carried the potential to detonate if it ever reached daylight. And that's when she revealed something even more unsettling. She alleged that after the split with Aaron Pierre, Teyana didn't simply move forward. She shifted into full image protection mode. According to Tasha, reputation management became the top priority. Public timelines seemed polished. Interviews felt carefully measured. Messaging grew tighter, more deliberate. She claimed subtle efforts were made to chip away at Aaron's credibility, not through loud accusations but through quiet suggestion, whispers about his emotional state, hints that he wasn't entirely stable. No direct attacks, just a slow reshaping of perception. And she warned her listeners. Once credibility erodes, the truth becomes much easier to bury. Tasha claimed insiders noticed a change in how Aaron was treated. Invitations slowed. Opportunities cooled. Connections felt more distant, as if a quiet narrative had begun circling about him behind the scenes. According to her, that shift wasn't random, it was influence at work. She framed this as the moment the situation turned strategic, because once fear enters the room, power moves to contain it. She described Hollywood as an ecosystem built on silence, and when that silence is threatened, the system reacts. This, she said, was when true containment began. Storylines were redirected. Instead of uncomfortable questions, the public saw tales of heartbreak, creative differences, personality clashes. Anything that kept attention on surface, and for a while it worked. While fans debated loyalty and love triangles, executives, she alleged, were quietly managing risk. Certain figures stepped back from public events. Appearances were scaled down. Conversations that once felt casual suddenly carried legal weight. One insider, she claimed, compared it to a silent retreat from the spotlight. No announcements, no explanations, just careful distance from situations that might invite scrutiny. Then she turned to social media. According to Tasha, once fragments of this story began slipping into online spaces, control started to weaken. Anonymous posts, cryptic comments, blind items that seemed too specific to be random. Fans began spotting patterns. Sudden breakups, unexplained cancellations, artists pulling back from visibility. And with every unexplained move, speculation intensified. She told her audience that one major project was allegedly delayed without a clear reason. A contract somewhere else was quietly reworked. A high-profile figure, she claimed, pushed for stricter personal clauses behind the scenes. No public explanations, but insiders, she suggested, understood why. Something had rattled the system. And that's when Tasha circled back to her most controversial assertion yet. That after the breakup, Teyana allegedly leaned on influence to shape how the story unfolded. Not through loud statements. Not through press conferences. But through access, proximity, and the quiet power that decides which questions get asked, and which ones never make it past the door. But through influence and access. She alleged that certain journalists suddenly stopped asking questions. Bloggers went silent. Stories that were fully prepared for publication mysteriously stalled in legal review. She didn't level direct accusations, but the implication was crystal clear. Power was quietly at work shaping the narrative. Then she paused, lowered her voice, and she told her audience that this is Hollywood's playbook for crisis. Not denial. Distraction. Spin a new narrative, stage a fresh romance, bombard the timeline with curated images. While the public debated love stories, the true threat quietly vanished from view. According to her, this tactic bought time. Months, maybe years. Enough for contracts to be rewritten, records to vanish, and for key players to quietly move on. But no one expected Tasha K. Because according to her, the reason she finally spoke was simple. People had been hurt not just emotionally but physically. And the silence surrounding it was no longer defensible. She told her listeners that what troubled her most wasn't the celebrity behavior itself. It was the pattern. The way power shields itself, the way truth is buried beneath influence, the way those without leverage are left to suffer the consequences alone. She warned that even if only one person had been unknowingly placed at risk, the story demanded to be told, no matter how explosive, no matter how uncomfortable. And then she made it clear. This was only the beginning. Fear, once unleashed in an industry, leaves fingerprints everywhere. Legal, medical, digital, and sooner or later someone speaks. She ended this segment with a chilling reminder. Names yet unspoken, documents yet unseen, connections still hidden. The full map of the story, she claimed, would expose not just relationships, but entire systems. Systems that prioritize fame over safety, silence over truth, and power over people. As she prepared to continue, one truth became unavoidable. Hollywood was no longer facing a scandal. It was confronting a crisis of trust. If even a fragment of these claims was true, this was no longer about a single celebrity. It was about an entire industry that may have knowingly allowed danger to persist as long as no one dared to speak. And the most terrifying part? Someone finally did. From that moment on, nothing about this story could ever be contained again. And here's what no one in Hollywood wants you to hear. If even a sliver of these allegations holds water, this isn't just a celebrity scandal anymore. This is a story of betrayal at the highest level, of trust shattered behind closed doors, and of an industry that chose silence over safety. Think about it. How many hearts were entrusted to love stories that were nothing but carefully staged illusions? How many careers were meticulously crafted on facades, while hidden dangers quietly loomed? How many lives were exposed to risk, quietly, invisibly, as cameras rolled and contracts were signed without hesitation? This is what happens when fame outweighs truth, when influence eclipses honesty, when reputations are shielded and consequences are buried deep beneath the glitter. Because the cruelest part of this saga isn't the headlines. It's the people who may never realize when betrayal struck. The partners who trusted blindly. The insiders who stayed silent. The executives who turned away. And the star at the eye of the storm, navigating fear, secrecy, pressure, and survival in an industry that offers no mercy when images crack. Tonight's story isn't gossip. It's a warning. It's about how swiftly love can twist into damage control. About how effortlessly narratives can be rewritten when power intervenes. And about how lethal silence becomes when the cost of truth is too high. Ask yourself this before you look away. What else lurks behind Hollywood's flawless smiles? Who else has been shielded while others bore the cost? How many stories remain buried, waiting for the perfect moment to erupt? One thing is certain. This story is far from over. New names will emerge. New documents will leak. New voices will shatter the silence. And when that happens, the reality we were fed may finally collapse. Stay vigilant. Stay questioning. And never forget, in this world, the deadliest secrets aren't the ones that ruin careers. They're the ones that almost no one sees coming.